This video is sponsored by the Armchair Historian website. More on that later. If you haven't seen my video on the battles of Lexington and Concord, we recommend you watch that before watching this episode. April 19th, 1775 was a disastrous day for the British Empire. Not only did a loosely organized group of Massachusetts rebels rout 1,500 English soldiers, but they also laid siege to the city of Boston that same day, trapping the imperial governor, General Thomas Gage. Colonial forces numbered some 7,000 men, but they lacked the heavy artillery necessary to force British supply ships out of the harbor. This bought General Gage and his 4,000 troops much needed time to call for reinforcements from England. By late May, 4,000 additional troops landed in Boston Harbor, accompanied by Generals Howe, Clinton, and Burgoyne. The commanders all agreed that a breakout was necessary before winter hit the besieged city. They came up with two targets: Dorchester Heights and Charlestown. These 2 points would act as staging areas to launch a pincer movement into the heart of the Patriot siege. With limited munitions and poor organization, colonial forces wouldn't stand a chance. But stationing thousands of soldiers and all of Britain's high command in one spot meant that their troop movements were quite conspicuous. In a great stroke of fortune for the commander-in-chief of the Massachusetts militia, Artemas Ward, word of a June offensive reached him before its intended start. But what was he to do with these plans? Splitting his forces in half to try to defend both points would put him at an even bigger disadvantage. Instead, Ward chose only to fortify Charlestown. His logic was that as long as one of the vantage points over Boston was secure, the British could not break the siege lest they leave their flank vulnerable to counterattack. However, the militia had to act fast if they hoped to beat the Redcoats to the punch. In the evening of June 16th, a little over 1,000 colonials, under the command of Colonel William Prescott, made their way over the Charlestown Neck to secure a strategic point dubbed Bunker Hill. Joining him was Brigadier General Israel Putnam, who had wagons loaded with tools and resources needed to fortify the hill. British ships were on the lookout for any movement, so Prescott's men had to move quietly through the dark New England night. When they finally arrived, a conference was held on whether to follow orders and build the redoubt on Bunker Hill, or go against orders and build on Breed's Hill. On one hand, the 75-foot-high Breed's Hill was closer to Boston, making it good for offensive posturing, but on the other hand, Bunker Hill was 35 feet taller and was closer to reinforcements. The decision to fortify Breed's Hill was finally reached after 2 hours of debate. In retrospect, this may not have been the best decision, as Breed's Hill was closer to the British warships in Boston Harbor, and as colonial forces were low on munition and heavy weaponry, an offensive stance wasn't going to do much. In the book, A Guide to the Battles of the American Revolution by Theodore P. Savas and J. David Dameron, it is written that Bunker Hill could have been made nearly impregnable, while Breed's Hill, closer to the harbor, was essentially untenable and offered nothing of strategic value not found in the former. By midnight, fortifications were being hastily built on Breed's Hill under the cover of darkness. Construction had to be completed fast before British forces discovered Putnam and Prescott's troops. At dawn, before they were completely finished, the crew aboard the HMS Lively spotted the men atop Breed's Hill and promptly opened fire. The cannonade was ineffective, however, as the commander of the ship ordered his men to hold fire until he had more intelligence about the situation. As this was happening, Howe, Clinton, and Burgoyne called for a conference to decide how to retaliate. The plan they settled on was this. Troops would be landed at the southeastern part of the peninsula as soon as possible, pinning down those defending Breed's Hill, while a separate force enveloped them by flanking around the rail fence on the redoubt's left flank. At 1 p.m., British troops landed around Moulton's Hill after another round of naval bombardment. Some of the fire was directed at Charlestown Neck this time to cut off colonial reinforcements, which did prove effective in scaring troops who dared cross the narrow pass. By 3 p.m., more British troops landed, and the attack was finally ready to commence. Except it wasn't, because sharpshooters in Charlestown were harassing British forces assembling on the beaches. So before the attack could begin, the HMS Lively was ordered to shell the town, setting it ablaze. 30 minutes later, the attack was finally ready to begin. Comprised of 4-man wide columns, the tightly packed troops confidently made their way up Breed's Hill. The heat was oppressive and was only made fiercer by the intense burning of Charlestown below. Smoke filled the sky and the drums of war began to sound. Weary colonial eyes looked down on the dense red lines approaching the hill. To their left was light infantry and grenadiers sent around to the rail fence. Ammunition was scarce, so keeping discipline was imperative for the colonials. Luckily for them, their leader, Prescott, was a remarkable commander. He inspired his men, fighting alongside them on the front line. Prescott ordered his men to target officers and hold their fire until British formations were within 50 yards. When a strong volley broke out atop Breed's Hill, British casualties quickly began to mount. The advance continued. Another volley hit the line. The advance continued. But as fire rained down on Howe's men, he was forced to withdraw. But there would be a second attack, and this time he would personally lead the light infantry. Around 4 p.m., the second assault commenced. British forces advanced in the same old way and were thrown back in the same old way. Howe, now furious, called for reinforcements. 400 British Marines, light cannon, and gunboats were sent to provide fire support for those assaulting the rail fence. The men were ordered to toss everything but their musket, ammunition, and bayonet so they could be as nimble as possible. This time, there would be no retreat. With Patriot forces low on ammunition, the British launched a massive bayonet charge against both positions, with the majority of their forces massed around the hill. Hand-to-hand fighting soon broke out in both locations, and the colonials were routed. Shortly after, the troops stationed at the rail fence were ordered to retreat to prevent envelopment. British forces then assumed the position atop Breed's Hill and fired down on the retreating soldiers, inflicting heavy casualties. But the British were too exhausted to pursue colonial forces over Charlestown Neck, allowing many rebels to escape. This battle was one of the bloodiest of the American Revolutionary War. While General Howe did capture the Charlestown Peninsula, it was at a terrible cost. The British suffered 226 dead and 828 wounded, which doesn't sound like a lot, but this was 45% of their force. The Americans suffered 140 dead and 301 wounded or captured, which was only about 15% of their force. What made this such a devastating defeat for the British was the amount of officers that were slain in the battle. To quote a guide to the battles of the American Revolution again, 1/8 of British officers killed and 1/6 of those wounded during the entire war were lost at Bunker Hill. The Pyrrhic victory at Charlestown made it impossible for the British to launch an attack on Dorchester Heights until more reinforcements arrived. The siege of Boston would remain a stalemate with no side at enough strength to break the other. However, the well-stocked Fort Ticonderoga had been taken in May, just 1 month prior. If the Americans could bring to bear newly captured munitions, especially heavy artillery, they might be able to turn the tide. There was one problem. Fort Ticonderoga was about 200 miles away in upstate New York. When the new minted Commander-in-Chief George Washington took command in July, he found himself in dire need of a miracle. Next time, we'll see if that miracle comes. Thanks for watching. If you want to gain full access to this series, which will cover nearly every battle of the American Revolution, you can go to thearmchairhistorian.com, go to join, and sign up for as little as $4 for your first month if you're one of the first 30 people to use my promo code REVOLUTION. Those who pay for the premium membership will also be able to request their own lecture videos every few months, which all members will be able to view. And the best part is that no videos on the website will have ads or sponsorships.